Yeah, great question. So I had been training for several years, um, getting um, getting sea time, doing a lot of volunteer crewing on yachts, so that I could sit the various levels of nautical exams. And while I was doing that, I actually started doing the nautical training when I was a chef here in Toronto. So I'm a formally trained chef. Plus, I did a few years of sommelier training while I was a chef. And the idea was to bring the formal chef training, the sommelier training, in with a captaincy and be a really great charter captain. And that's pretty much what the objective was. And so what I was doing, actually, I had already done the theory for the Yacht Master ocean level, and all that was required was then to sit the exam for the celestial navigation portion of that certification. And what that means is you have to use a sextant to navigate. So there's a qualifying ocean passage, a 600-mile ocean passage, and during that passage, you use a sextant, and in fact, it never occurred to me. I suppose I can pull the sextant out and show it to people who are wondering what a sextant is. But anyhow, it's an instrument, a more sophisticated version of what Christopher Columbus and the guys had when they crossed over, and you shoot the sun or stars, in Christopher Columbus's case, he was shooting the North Star, and that's how you get your latitude, right?
And by shooting, you mean aiming the instrument towards that?
You're holding the sextant up to your eye, and you're shooting whatever it is. In my case, it was mostly the sun. So you have to show that you can navigate using a sextant only, and with a sextant and using almanacs, you can get not only your latitude but your longitude, and then you plot it, right? And then you basically, with several sun sites, you plot a course, and then I would have presented that to the examiner. In this case, here in Canada, the examiners are out in Halifax. So I had already completed a qualifying run, so I had already used the sextant, I had already plotted. So in this case, I thought I would do it again because I'm actually developing a course to teach people how to use a sextant. So I thought I would get as many sun sites as possible and do as much plotting as possible, so that I could include those as examples in this course that I was developing. So that actually is a good segue into, that great question is a good segue into why I was even on that particular vessel. And I chose it, and in fact it was a volunteer crew gig, but I chose it specifically because the owner of the yacht, so with this delivery, the owners were on board. The male owner knew and took sites himself all the time, actually. So that's ultimately why I chose that run. They also happen to be Canadian, so I thought, that would be great, right? Because at least we have that in common. Because let's face it, it was going to be a long run, and you're in the confines of it's a 41-foot catamaran, which is a decent size, but it's when you're on board for that duration, it can get a bit cramped. So it's better to know who the people are, right, and that you guys have some things in common, you can get along, etc., etc. so.
It was a couple, right? And they were fairly new owners? Did they have any sailing experience?
They had a bit. They did a couple of charters. They did most of their sailing on Canadian lakes. And I think they did a couple of charters. I think they chartered for a week in the Bahamas on a catamaran. No doubt with the idea of acquiring experience on a catamaran, because they had planned to purchase a catamaran anyway, right? And then I think they did a week charter in, I think it was in Greece, I'm not sure. But in terms of experience, I had way, like I had been all over the world by that time, right? So I had a lot more experience than both of them. So I chose that because I wanted to use the voyage as another qualifying run to do the sites. They happened to be Canadian, and it was a pretty good run. Like, I mean, it started in Menorca, and then we came out and we stopped in at Madeira, Canaries, Cape Verde Island. So it was, and especially because it was kind of sort of the route that Christopher Columbus took anyway, I thought it would be very apropos as well. But what I did is I gave up an Indian Ocean crossing to get on this voyage that I ended up doing. And it was tough for that. I really wanted to do the Indian Ocean crossing because I could have done all the things that I wanted to do with the sextant. In this case, there was a captain on board. It was a delivery, and he knew how to use the sextant, and so all of that was there. All of those kinds of things that I wanted was there. Plus, we would have ended up in South Africa over Christmas, which would have been pretty cool too, right? So, anyway, so that's sort of the lead up to that. So this would have been ultimately the last run that I would have had to have done before I could have started to apply then for the dream job, which would have been, I'm sure, somewhere in the BVIs, right? Mm-hmm. I would have contacted some people who I know who were expecting to hear from me to say, hey, I'm done, I'm ready to go. Yeah. And because to be a charter captain, you basically, if you're coming from the yacht master side of things, they really need you to have your yacht master ocean level. But I also have most of the American Sailing Association certifications, and I have the OUVP U.S. Coast Guard license as well. In fact, it's the only U.S. Coast Guard license available to Canadians anyway. So I had a lot of other stuff backing me up too. Plus, I had completed a dive master internship. I did that in Cozumel. It was a 45-day program, and I was really excited about that too, because that is something else. So as a charter captain, I would basically have a floating 5-star restaurant / hotel with all of my formal training. Plus, I would have had that extra thing that a lot of charter captains don't have, and that is I would have been able to take people out for dives, right, as a dive master. And the other thing as well, I was literally like a week away from the CDI program. I could have done a week more training with the dive school at Cozumel, and then I would have been a first level dive instructor. So I would have then been able to certify people as well.
So it really would have been a very high quality experience for people to
absolutely
to do all the diving with gourmet meals if they wanted, and all kinds of wine catered to the food that was requested.
Absolutely. And actually that's a good point there too, because with my sommelier training, and all of this stuff was already in the works. I would have given wine appreciation courses and this kind of stuff, done wine tasting. So the idea was to offer these things that not only were not offered by other charter captains or charter couples, but to really make it an experience so that people were leaving as how would I even explain this, bigger, better versions of themselves, because
You could have incorporated your sommelier painting or watercolor painting experiences. If
oh
people
yeah,
were
yeah,
interested.
yeah, all
Right.
kinds of really cool things, and they're paying a lot of money. Like some of these charters cost $20,000 a week, right? So, and as an ambitious guy who wants to put out quality and to be known for quality, that's where my mind was, to put out the very best experience that I possibly could. So I saw the post on a cruise site, and then I made contact with the owners. Normally I Skype. In fact, I always Skype because I really need to see who the people are. Right? Again, you're in a confined space for a long period of time. You don't want to show up and find out that you're complete opposite personalities, right?
Yeah, and that virtual meeting at least gives you some kind of sense of who they are.
Yeah, and my intuition has never led me astray, right? So I would have known immediately, but they didn't for some reason. They chose to just have two short phone conversations, and but again, they're Canadian. He knows how to use the sextant, and was willing to work with me, because ultimately you have to have somebody working with you, at the very least marking the time when you're using the sextant. And I think at some point I may very well pull the sextant out and show it to the audience, and then actually just quickly go through the basics of it so they understand where the second person comes into it. So they bought the yacht in France. I don't remember what part of France, but anyway, the two of them sailed it to Menorca. And what the arrangement was for me to fly to Gibraltar, and I would basically hang around there. And this was November, and I would hang around Gibraltar, and they would sail from Menorca, and I would meet them in Gibraltar, which was great because I was really excited about taking the ferry across from Gibraltar over to Morocco and bombing around there for a bit. Because this is one of the sort of side effects that happens when you're delivering yachts. Almost invariably, you're in each port long enough to go and explore, and sometimes long enough to really get to know the city that you're in, right?
Yeah,
So,
and you've done a lot of your night crawl kind of videos that you've posted for people to sort of experience what it's like around the world at night.
And I really miss that, actually. It was really quite a challenge for me to make the transition to being on land permanently, like with my heart and every part of me wanting to be back out there again. So it wasn't just the sailing aspect of it, it was the travel, wandering around, the back alleys, and really exploring the different countries. And as you say, I did, when I had my website, I did have a bunch of videos that I think I called them night crawls, where I would go out at 2 a.m. and explore, because there's a completely different vibe when everyone's asleep and it's dark, right? And you've got your footsteps echoing through the cobblestoned alleyways and stuff like that. So I really do miss that aspect of it. So rather than flying to Gibraltar directly, I flew to England because I forgot to take some videos for this sextant course that I'm creating. I forgot to take some video at the Royal Observatory. So I flew to England first, and then from England it was just a short flight would have been a short flight over to Gibraltar. But when I was communicating with them, I was asking them how they were doing, and they outright, straight up told me that it was a really tough sail from France to Menorca. And, we're a sailing community, so even though I really wanted to go to Gibraltar and then, spend the time over in Morocco, I said, how are you guys okay? Do you want me to wait here while you guys sail over? Or do you want me to meet you in Menorca? And they immediately said, yes, please, come to Menorca. We really need the help. So that's what I did. So rather than flying to Menorca, I flew rather than flying to Gibraltar, Gibraltar, I flew directly to Menorca. And they were quite relieved, so that's kind of setting that up as well. To like mostly inexperienced people. There are a couple from Alberta, Canada, buying their dream yacht and living their dream to cross the Atlantic and then to have the yacht in tooling around, sailing around in the Caribbean, and then I think they also had plans to head over to Panama and things like that. So that's what it was. So I flew to England, and from there to Menorca, met them in Menorca, which was a lot of fun too, exploring Menorca for a bit because I had never been there. And excited for myself, of course, to do another ocean crossing, to take more sights with the sextant. And then finally, that would have been the end, meeting with the examiners on the East Coast so they can take a look at my plottings and whatnot and get the green light for the Yachtmaster certification. And then I could basically, in my mind, write my own ticket. And that's basically...
So when you joined them, did you go to Gibraltar?
So we left after a short time. They had some repairs to do on the yacht. We left Gibraltar, we left Menorca, and then we sailed to Gibraltar. Gibraltar was one of the stops. We actually berthed in a marina on the Spanish side, and then once we were berthed and squared away, the next day we actually walked over to the Gibraltar side. And then, of course, all of this is on all of these trips you can see on my YouTube channel. But we went up to the Rock of Gibraltar, which was a lot of fun, and tooled around for a couple of days, and then we left. And from there, we sailed out through the famous Straits of Gibraltar out into the Atlantic. Very uneventful. We were getting along. They're fairly simple people, and as I am too, not a complicated sort of guy. The female owner, I don't want to use their real names because I'm going to be talking about the yacht attack, but I'll call the female owner, if I call her Misty, just in case she sees the video, how would she feel about me calling her Misty? What other female names are
well,
there?
Mary?
Okay.
I was going to say Jane, Jane Doe is usual ones, but I think Mary would be great too.
Okay, so the female owner, you'll all know, is Mary, and the male yacht owner is Steve. Okay, Steve and Mary. So Mary is a fantastic cook, and so we were well fed, and they were happy to have me or have another person on board to help them, right? I'm in the role of crew member for the most part. I know I could make more efforts to be sort of part of the family, that kind of thing, but I really like to maintain that sort of line where everybody remembers that I'm there as a crew member, right? Mm-hmm. So very diligent and careful with my night watches, careful with the yacht, all of those kinds of things. So everybody was happy with the situation. So we stopped in, so the idea was to stop in at Madeira, the Canary Islands, the Cape Verdes, and then from the Cape Verdes, we would cross the ocean, across the Atlantic, and deliver the yacht to St. Lucia. So came out into the Atlantic, arrived in Madeira, arrived in Funchal, the capital city of Madeira. But they wanted to berth the yacht in a marina because they had planned to go home back to Canada for the holidays. So we ended up sailing up the coast to the east or easterly side of the island to Calheta, to the marina there because it was cheaper, and that was where the yacht was left for just about a month, I think. So we berthed the yacht there. I got to know quite a few of the people there particular, a German couple, and she, Bridget. Hey, Bridget. Bridget owns kind of like a tourist shop there in the marina, and her husband Bjorn is a sea captain, but actually a sea pilot in Germany. So he goes back and forth from Germany to Madeira. So the owners left, and I'll try to make this bit as short as possible so I can get to the yacht attack. But the owners left and went back to Canada for the holidays. I stayed on board the yacht for a couple of days, and then I flew to Portugal, and then I did Rome, and then Venice, and then in Budapest, where I actually had a really sweet little sort of a studio loft kind of apartment. So I was there over Christmas and loved it. And I was there actually it was perfect timing because the crowds weren't there at all. So I basically had Rome, Venice, and Budapest all to myself. At least that's what it felt like. Flew back to Madeira in time for New Year's Eve. Then the yacht owners came back. Mary and Steve came back, I think, first week of January. And at that point, a fourth crew member joined us, Dave. Dave is a Brit, born and raised in England, but he had been living in South Carolina for a long time. Another engineer, Steve, was an engineer as well. So he joined us. So when we departed Madeira, there were four of us.
Mm-hmm. So there's four of you, two crew, the two owners, the couple, Mary and Steve, and now you're leaving. So where did you go to from there?
Yeah, so again, 41-foot catamaran. And from Madeira, we headed over to the Canaries. We stayed on the island of Tenerife for 2 days, I think. Those kinds of details are kind of shady right now, but so we stayed there for a bit, did some exploring. That's when I found out that Dave and I were kindred spirits, because he loved to explore just as much as I did. In fact, he was the one that found all of these really cool places, really great cafes and restaurants and, and bars, this kind of, he really had an eye for that. And Dave is 70 years old, but he may as well have been 20, and that spirit, that traveling adventure was just, it was intoxicating for me, right? Exactly the kind of guy that you love to, or person that you love to travel with and sail with. So from Tenerife, we sailed to the Cape Verde Islands, and we started off at the northern extremity of the Cape Verde archipelago. I think it was Ilha de Sol, the island of Salt, and I think the very first port was Palmyra. And the moment that we arrived, I just had a bad feeling about the Cape Verde Islands from the beginning. And of course, the Cape Verde Islands is where the attack took place. Very run down in the sense of, and again, I'll make this disclaimer, I'm not deliberately trying to offend anybody or anybody that lives in Cape Verde or whatever. This is just what I saw. And the videos that I've taken, pretty much show that as well. But just a run down kind of place. In fact, it reminded me a little bit of Cologne, Panama, where I had another sort of bad experience, but just another one of those places where you could see it used to be quite a beautiful place, but somehow
not maintained.
At some point, it's like everybody just decided, you know what, we're not going to bother with this place anymore, and they just let it, And the Cape Verdes used to be Portuguese islands, and I really should have prepared more for this interview, but because I'm sure it would be interesting to be able to tell you guys when the Portuguese had it and when they left and turned it back over to, because it's effectively African island chain, right? It's about 250 nautical miles, I think, off the coast of Senegal. But it's an African island chain now anyway. So, you know, maybe there wasn't much care put into the transition when the Portuguese were handing it back. I don't know, but it was very, very run down. Palmyra port. And we pulled into the port and we didn't even berth anywhere. Like, we didn't drop anchor, nothing. We just floated in the anchorage for a bit. And I was grateful that they didn't want to stay there because it would have been very uncomfortable for me. But anyhow, you know, I just had a bad feeling come over me. Excuse me. And so now again, I've got all of this experience. Like, I mean, I must have had close to like 30,000 sea miles from volunteer crewing alone, right? So in a sense, that Mary and Steve, to a guy like me, they were like babes in the woods, right? Mm-hmm. I've been all over the place. And when you sail as much as I have to the places where I've sailed, you get another sort of sense, you know, beyond your beyond the sixth sense. You pick things up. Your intuition becomes really sort of fine-tuned, you know. And one of the things that you just have to do as an international sailor, if you're sailing around the world on your yacht, you have to be aware of the dangers, right? And when you do it long enough, it's not an effort anymore, it's just a natural instinct. And I knew that if we did stay there, it would have been a very dangerous place. So one of the things that I noticed is a couple of the locals started up their dinghies. A dinghy is a smaller boat that any larger yacht, like most 41, 42 foot yachts, sailing yachts, have a dinghy on board. In case you have to anchor, in case you decide, you know, even to save a little money and anchor if the anchorage is safe. And and it's protected from the elements, right? Like protected from wind, etc. You'll often choose to drop the anchor and stay in the anchorage. Well, you need to be able to get to shore, right? So that's where having a dinghy comes into play. You lower the dinghy into the water, everybody gets in, and you motor to shore, right? And frankly, a lot of people still use paddles. They don't bother with a dinghy engine. So they started up there, and often they're rubberized, the dinghies that a lot of people have on board, and they're rubberized. And some people will to change things up. A lot of people will have a hard bottom on the dinghy, which is really great because then you can really explore some really cool places with your dinghy. Lots of places in Mexico where you can do that, right? But a lot of people would be reluctant to explore in a rubber dinghy without that hard bottom because, you know, often there are.
You never know, especially if it's a new place to you.
You don't want to get you don't want your dinghy to get punctured. So.
And then you don't only lose your dinghy, you then have to swim in unknown waters to get back to your boat.
Yeah.
Not great.
Yeah, for sure. So.
Jason, I think maybe we should take a pause because this has now been a long stretch.
Okay.
And it's been 32 minutes.